Pour ce dernier chapitre de la conférence 2024, you are the best group ever. So disciplined. C'est incroyable que nous soyons déjà Welcome back, re-bienvenue pour cette dernière présentation à cette conférence de l'ACCS 2024. Welcome back to this final presentation to the CASC Conference 2024. C'est incroyable que nous soyons déjà à la dernière présentation et c'est ma dernière opportunité pour vous dire quelques mots. This is, it's hard to believe that we're already at the last presentation, and this is my last opportunity to say a few words to you before we part. We're grateful to our closing keynote sponsor, the Canada Foundation for Innovation, CFI, for making this possible. CFI is a nonprofit corporation that invests in research infrastructure at Canadian universities, colleges, research hospitals, and nonprofit research institutions with the cutting-edge facilities, laboratories, and equipment they need to push the frontier of knowledge in all disciplines to discover and to innovate. This has allowed Canada's bright minds to contribute to creating a better world with evidence-based policymaking, better health outcomes, a cleaner, greener environment, more vibrant cultures, and more competitive Canadian businesses. Before I invite our next speaker to lead the closing session, I want to take a final minute to share an image that hangs in my office and the story that goes with this image. First of all, the artwork is the creation of a former employee who one day came to work and said to me, "I'm sorry, but I have to quit my job." And I was heartbroken. She says, "I'm going blind. I'm literally, legally blind right now. And before I lose my sight, I want to paint." And I really hope Eric finds that painting. Here you go. So she painted this work of art, and for many years, I did ask her once a year if she was ready to part with it. And the reason for it is that in 2010, in the spring of 2010, I was going through a very big challenge professionally. And there was a woman by the name of Wilma Mankiller who passed away that spring. She was a Native American activist, social worker, community developer, and the first woman elected to serve as principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. She passed away at this time where I was looking for a mantra, something that would keep me going. And that sentence was, "Be the buffalo." She was well known for her love of the bison, mostly called the buffalo or tatanka by the Cherokee people. And as I read her quote, and I'll borrow her words, she would say to her people, "When the storm comes, the cows, the horses run away and hide, but the buffalo stands, faces the storm, and runs toward it." So be the buffalo. And in all that you do in life, in your personal journey as educators, as scientists, as protectors of Mother Earth in your everyday life, I just want to tell you, be the buffalo. Merci de m'avoir si généreusement accueilli dans votre grande famille scientifique. Thank you for generously welcoming me in your scientific family this week. And now, without further ado, please welcome Sandy Baumgartner, CEO of the Saskatchewan Science Centre and President of the CASC Board of Directors, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Whew. I'm not sure how to follow that. And I've heard this story before, and I've had the privilege of seeing this painting in Claire's home office. So thank you very much for sharing that, Claire. Most of you probably saw Buffalo while we were in Saskatoon. I hadn't had that on my list, but I had a number of things when we set out planning this conference that I wanted to achieve. One was to get you all here, so tick. Thank you. 2 was to show you this amazing province that I have the greatest privilege to call home. I moved away for a while, and sometimes when you move away, you know what you've missed, and I come back, and even though I've heard many jokes about that flat prairie that you all experience from Saskatoon to Regina, I wanted you to experience that, because that is something that when I moved to Ontario and lived in boreal forest, you only see trees, and I realized how much I missed seeing that bald prairie, that we have a joke, your dog can run away and you see it for 3 days. The other thing that I wanted to do on my list to tick off was to get you to not only come to the Saskatchewan Science Centre, but to meet the amazing people that I get to work with every day. And you've met a few of them over this weekend. Thank you for honoring our team that are here with 2 awards today. It warms my heart more than you can know. So I ticked that box, I got you there. You met our staff, and you had a really good time, or at least you told me you had a good time. That's all I need to know. And the last thing that was on my to-do list that I really wanted to share with this group was an amazing institution, and I shouldn't use the institution, but I was lost for what else to describe it. There's an amazing educational facility in our province that is a national cherished wonder, which is the First Nations University of Canada. And I actually, from my office, can see that building. And I actually, though, visited our guest speaker in her office. She can see me. I like her view better, but anyways, we are across at the marsh from each other. The First Nations University is an amazing learning institution, and I wanted to make sure that everyone that's in this room and that attended this conference knows that we have this world-class facility right here in our city. So before I introduce our guest speaker, we just have a short video about the university that we're going to share with you all. So if we could, there we go.
Built on the prayers of our elders, who envisioned the wings of the thunderbird, elevating students higher and higher, to test our resilience, to prove our character, to find spirit, to find our second home, where people of all colors, all nations, are welcome to lay down roots and walk the indoor and outdoor classrooms of one of the oldest First Nations post-secondary education centers in the country. This is the place for which spiritual warriors fought for this dream to be. An Indigenous university for all. More than just to learn, we come to be whole. The First Nations University of Canada welcomes you all. Come step into the future with an edge like no other.
So there, my final tick box for the conference is to introduce you to our closing keynote speaker. I know in your program we called it a fireside chat, but in chatting with Dr. Ottmann, we really felt, you just need to hear from her, and she's got some beautiful images to share in her presentation. So she'll come and present some of the work that she has done, some of the experiences that she shares, and some of the learnings and teachings that she uses in her work. So Dr. Jacqueline Ottmann is the president of the First Nations University of Canada, joined it about 2.5 years ago. She's Anishinaabe from Fishing Lake First Nations here in Saskatchewan, has a very long career in academia and is leading this institution to what you saw here, and I'm very proud to introduce you to Dr. Jacqueline Ottmann.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandy, for that wonderful introduction. And I always like to begin by saying, Anin dino maganak, mizawekamegok pepa moteng dizanakas, nuchiganozeaning dunji engagik and miamayan nungum. And so basically what I said, shared with you is, hello, all my relations, or greetings, all my relations. And then I shared with you where I come from in the Saulteaux or Plains Ojibwe language, and that is Nochiganozeaning, and that's Fishing Lake First Nation. I also shared with you my traditional name, which is Mizawekamegokpepa Motang. And I'll share a little bit about that, but the last thing I said is I'm very happy to be here today. So our names, the names that are given to us in different ways by elders, are basically, or many of them are action-oriented and connected to nature and creation. And my parents were teenage parents. My mom had just turned 17 when I was born. And so, you know, me and a moss bag, they traveled to the nearby town at a grocery store, and then an elder heard me crying, and he came directly over to them and said, I know who this is. I've dreamt about her, and I know what her name is. And so at that point, you know, afterwards, he asked if we could engage in a naming ceremony, and that's where that name came from. And it has to do, like, so much gets lost in translation, but there is a certain kind of thunder that you could feel, and it rolls over a large landscape. And so that's my name, right? And I remember talking with a Blackfoot elder when I was at the University of Calgary, and he said, "This is how we name it. This is how we say that kind of thunder." And so he shared the Blackfoot word for that, and then he drew on a piece of paper the image of this thunder, and then he said, "Now go get it tattooed on you." I actually haven't done that, so, but who knows? Someday it's a very beautiful line drawing that he did, and if not on me, then I'll have to get it an artist to you know, just make a depiction of that image, and so. Again, nature and action and verb-oriented, and so there's really a lot that I want to share, and I love this. I've always been drawn to sciences, and although I'm in the field of education, have all my life have been drawn to the science in nature, right? And I've always had this artistic tendency at the same time. Dr. Gregory Kahede, who's a Pueblo scholar, says that art and science are two sides of the same coin. And there isn't as much of a siloed approach to disciplines within Indigenous philosophies. Probably within your centers, within your spaces, you will have art integrated with concepts of science, right? And there's teaching aspects to it. There's math. There's every discipline that is interconnected within science centers. And that's how Indigenous peoples really view the integration, the organization of things. So this is an image that I use quite a bit, and even though I'm talking about Indigenous knowledge systems and in relation to sciences, there's my research background is in leadership. So Indigenous perspectives of leadership and organization and change management. I don't like the word change management. I don't like the word management. So I would just say change, leadership, organization, and change. And that, even within that process, I've always leaned into science, right? And so this really, that whole process is called biomimicry. And so what you see here, it encapsulates a lot about Indigenous perspectives. And so I speak in a circular fashion. It's as some of my elders do. It's not a straight line. That means you got to pay attention. There's storytelling. Because of that, then there's, we're engaging higher order thinking. And so storytelling is actually a very complex way of teaching, and it often leaves the learner with more questions than answers, right? But then within life, the answers emerge in various ways if you're paying attention. And so life is not a straight line. Storytelling within our communities is not a straight line. Time, our perception of time is not a straight line. It's not linear. And so basically, within every single moment, we have a relationship with our ancestors and those children not yet born. Every single moment. And we have a responsibility to them. I can jump into complexity theory and chaos theory when I speak to that, but that's kind of further along within the presentation. So, how does this relate to centers? It really, really does. It relates to how I operate as a leader within a university setting, and it relates to how I develop relationships, right? So there is a sense of responsibility, and my elder advisor is Maria Campbell. I don't know how many of you have heard of that name, but if you haven't, you should look into her work. She's amazing. And but within the Cree language, and I'm not Cree, but there are multiple words for responsibility. And in the kind of responsibility, and I can't say the Cree word right now, but basically is the kind of responsibility that you would see in nature. An example would be a mother bear, right? Risking her life for her children, and that's the future. right? So as a leader, as someone who has significant responsibility in knowledge transmission, what are your priorities and what are you fierce about, right? Are you fierce about inclusion? Are you fierce about diversity and equity and, creating sense of belonging? And how are you demonstrating that? Because people are always watching for integrity, which is how do we walk the talk, right? And our children are watching, and so are our colleagues. So if we prioritize Indigenous peoples, prioritize the concept of indigenization, what are you doing to resource it, right? What are you doing to sustain it? And what are you doing to change systems and structures to ensure that indigenization is actually felt even beyond the hiring of Indigenous peoples? One of the most because I'm an educator and I was asked to come into Calgary Science School years ago. And they asked me to speak or to engage in professional development in relation to the Indigenous Peoples Unit. They didn't have to do the extensive work that they engaged in or even engage in a process-oriented learning development or professional development opportunity because they had no Indigenous students, right? They engaged in it because they had felt it was important that how they taught about Indigenous peoples to these students was important. And so the educators the teachers needed to educate themselves, right? And I learned that there was dialogue related to misinformation. And we do know that in relation to Indigenous histories, Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous practices, there may be misinformation, and there's many examples of it, right? So that was a topic that we engaged in. It was a question that the teachers had, like, where is the authentic information, and what sources could they depend on, and how could they move outside of the more of the traditional teacher pedagogies to be more experiential and interactive with Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. That was a phenomenal experience for me, and that was probably about 10 years ago, right? So inquiry has, and I think really good questions have emerged in relation to Indigenous inclusivity for a long time, even prior to TRC. One of the areas of misinformation, misconceptions, stereotypes is that Indigenous peoples are primitive, and really there's a lot of complexity and sophistication within our intellect, right? And so these are images of ancient, or images and of ancient locations that have, well, they're sacred sites, but there is also a lot of learning that can happen from these places. Indigenous peoples have been astronomers, engineers, even before colonization and European arrival. And if you've read the book 1491 by Charles Mann, there is this revisiting of artifacts. And what they're finding is that, it's a lot more trying to see these artifacts from a non-European lens, but actually asking questions like, what did this mean to Indigenous peoples? And here you have an image of a medicine wheel, but it's also a star chart, right? And they're very, very accurate. We know medicine wheels promote or speak to balance, the striving for balance. And so it's holistic health, not only for humanity, but all of creation. And, once you start investigating Indigenous practices, you'll learn that, tomatoes did not originate in Italy, right? They made the sauce, but early Europeans felt that they were poisonous, or they could be poisonous. And then, the Aztecs and cocoa that was used as a, that was kind of monetary exchange. They used cocoa. And of course, the Aztecs also loved hot chocolate with chili peppers, right? And maple syrups, the health benefit of maple syrup. And pineapple, was didn't really originate on the islands, but in the Americas. So there's a lot to investigate. And what are we doing as leaders and as teachers and as leaders, or as people, to inform and to inform and to stay engaged, and then to articulate to people that walk in our doors some of this amazing knowledge. Again, just more evidence of the complexity within the Americas connected to maths and sciences. And for a long time, scientists were trying to figure out just what these spaces meant. I mean, to a degree, they still are, and just coming to grips with the accuracy of some of the sun daggers that are out there related to equinoxes, the winter and the summer equinoxes. So there's just a lot of beauty, and we've got. We used to have huge, prior to colonization and European arrival, huge gatherings, perhaps along the Mississippi River, of nations coming together. And the common language was, in some cases, sign language. And I was working with a group of elders at the University of Calgary from across Alberta, and that language still exists. These elders were talking to each other of the economic language, historic economic language, which was sign language. On that line also is that Indigenous peoples our economy is a gift economy, right? So there's this exchange of gifts, and it's actually, if you think about protocol, it's an important part of protocol, and that's gaining access to relationships and or to research and or to community, right? And so gift economy, very, very important. But going back to these huge nation-to-nation gatherings, healers would come together, medicine people, and exchange medicines, and they would also talk about their healing practices. And there's evidence of hydraulics, canals, water system, and hybrid, farming practices, and hybrid, creating various breeds of, let's say, strawberries, right? And governance, early forms of democracy. And I was invited to Paris to OECD, gathering of international education ministers, and they asked me to speak on democracy. And so it was really my pleasure to talk about even the U.S. Constitution and the Great Law of Peace that really brought together 5 and then 6 warring nations. And that's, again, an incredible story. And wampum belts really demonstrate the principles that are connected to that particular agreement, because it is a long-standing agreement. Our agreements are basically covenantal, because ceremony is connected to that, so that our treaties, we see them as covenantal, because the pipe was lifted and the incense from the pipe just rose to the Creator. And so that's another reason why we'll never let go of that particular agreement, the covenantal aspect. So in relation to governance, again, there is so much to learn about Indigenous perspectives on leadership and governance that are still in practice today. So this is really what I'm going to be talking about. Those were the 3, 7 generations philosophy, the medicine wheel, and I forget the other one, but we'll get there. So in relation to education and learning, we didn't have a word for schooling. But education, according to Gregory Kahadian, he's done research in this area, is this concept of coming to know, right? So coming to know. Education is not bound. It's boundaryless. It's not bound by a curricula. It's not bound by a facility. It's not bound by a teacher. So it's limitless and it's lifelong. Right, so there's humility connected to all of these practices. And of course, there's community responsibility. Our kinship structures are different. My brothers, I have 5 brothers, and my brothers are my children's other fathers. Their partners are my children's other mothers. That means that they don't have only 2 sets of grandparents, but all of my mother's sisters and brothers are my children's grandfathers and grandmothers, right? And so it's a different worldview. And we have rites of passage, vision quests, where you isolate yourself alone, and really the intent is to discover your sense of purpose in relation to the whole, right? Because everything is interconnected. So I'm going to move faster here. I already talked about this. But the first agreement between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people was between the Mohawk and the Dutch in about 1613. And that's the wampum. It's Kiswentha wampum belt. The purple beads represent the nations. The white beads represent peace, friendship, and respect. So if you're talking about relationship with Indigenous peoples, there still is that underlying, that underlying intention to move towards peace, friendship, and respect. How could we collaborate in constructive ways? And if you look at even the treaty medal, you look at the Indigenous, non-Indigenous person there, and they're creating a bridge through the handshake. There's a tomahawk on the ground, meaning that there'll be no conflict or warring with each other. And it's equality. It's nation to nation, right? So that is another, we have to think about some of these metaphors and some of these artifacts and how they can really guide our moving forward in relationship. I'm all about systems change, and when I was in graduate school and I heard about chaos and complexity theory, I recognized them right away and made a parallel to Indigenous philosophies. And so basically, there's chaotic systems and there's order underlying chaotic systems. They need each other, right? And so whenever there's change, we have this sense of chaos and question the need for change, and especially if it's second order, deep-seated change, transformational change, right? And learning that requires both single and double loop learning, again, going deeper and deeper into learning and shifting, right, mindsets. And so, when I was also learning about fractals within that whole, concept of quantum physics, again, I recognized fractals all around, and how Indigenous peoples have had this intuitive understanding of the unseen and how it is expressed within through art. If you see these men's fancy dancers, they are beautiful. And I would encourage you to actually Google men's fancy dancer, and then you would see fractals in motion. Also, in terms of the butterfly effect, where one minute change or a butterfly wing could cause something turbulent or something forceful, that's really decision making. Our decisions can impact generations into the future, as the Indian Act has. And we're still reeling from the implications of the Indian Act. And our children are experiencing symptoms of a decision that was made in 1876, right? So it's reaching across over time. And so how can we override some of these, demeaning and divisive and destructive forces? And in this case, it was an act, right? But it could be a policy. It could be some form of legislation. Where are those barriers? And we have that again in our dances, right? That movement, that change. And this is a women's fancy dancer. And you see the color, the vibrancy, and the motion. Women are considered powerful. And in many of our societies are matriarchal. But that has been challenged and really pushed underground by legislation and by the teachings of residential school, patriarchal behavior. And Maria Campbell has done research and has discovered that there were certain missionaries that were offended by the power, the leadership that women had in their communities and the freedom that children had in the communities. And so play is powerful. Play engages the whole body. And so play and that kind of experiential learning was really, really important. We know that now, right? We know that now. And then the medicine wheel, like there is that idea of balance, and how even in Earth you see the forces, the forces between hot and cold pressures, and that constant striving towards balance, right? It's perpetual within creation, and we see them from satellites, right? And even though again it's chaotic, there is an underlying reason for these powerful forces. And so Gregory Kahede talks about bifurcation point, right? Again, these forces that are evident even here between hot and cold and water. And, there's this point where there's this eruption, this burst. And so Gregory Kahede calls that the point of freedom, right? And so again, as people from different worldviews, different perspectives, how can we come together? And yes, as in braiding a tight braid or trying to make a tight braid, there will be pressures. But if you're going to make a tight braid, that tug is needed, right? And so we should expect that chaotic feeling. We should expect those pressures. It's not going to be easy for systemic change within our organizations. And so we know that because there's change literature that says, there's an implementation dip. And this is what I say to my team, is that if we're going to implement something systemic, then basically we're going to feel that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And some people will want to spring back into the familiar, even though the familiar may not be good for the whole, right? So, I was talking, this is part of my research, and I was talking to a young Indigenous leader, and reflection in action, and I see I've run out of time here. But basically, again, inaction is what we do on the run, and reflection on action is what we do to start to engage those, deeper questions that will initiate second-order change, right? Those are the big shifts, systemic shifts. An example of that would be when I was at the University of Saskatchewan. We were finding, it's a general experience, Indigenous scholars across the country, especially if they're engaged in Indigenous methodologies in their research, it takes, are evaluated, I'll say poorly, because community-based research takes a long time. It depends on relationships, and it depends on the rate and the pace of community, not on an individual researcher. And so, and that was my experience, is that as a researcher, I was misunderstood, and yet the impact on community of the work that I was doing was real for the community. And so what we did at University of Saskatchewan is we opened up the university standards, which really looked at how educators or pedagogies, again, how teachers were evaluated, our teaching was evaluated, how our research was evaluated to be inclusive of Indigenous methodologies and pedagogies and practices. So that is structural change. Right, and was that easy? No, it took probably a year and a half for the university to agree for deans and for us to look at those standards. And the Spirit questions, and I kind of went through that really quickly because it did speak to reflection, right? The importance of reflection, and I don't know how to go back, but that's okay. And so that's what that young leader was saying, is we need to ask good questions, and we need to ask, and we need to kind of really reflect on our values, our beliefs, our the thoughts that are running through our mind. If you're in a First Nation community, what are the first thoughts that come through your mind? Is it fear? And if it's fear, then why is that? Or is it disgust? If it's disgust, then why is that? If it's curiosity, then, of course there's openness in that, right? So how do you get to that space of curiosity? And this really speaks to what I've been talking about in all that I do. And actually, I led my unit led the University of Saskatchewan Indigenous Strategy, again, which is systemic. And I co-chaired the University of Calgary Indigenous Strategy with the provost. But the U of S strategy, which you can download, was based on those 4 questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What are my responsibilities? But what we did is kind of who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What are our responsibilities? You can call those leadership existential questions, but I, at that point, use them for a strategy. And so, this is something to think about in your organization. And when we looked at that first question, who are we didn't start when the university began, which was 1906. I think it was 1906, 1905, 1909, and early 1900s. But we began with the creation story, right? We began with the people who lived on that land prior to the university's existence. And then, the university, and moved that right up to today. So that relationship responsibility to the past, and keeping in mind that our decisions will impact children 7 generations into the future. That's complexity theory. We're living on the edge, not only of perhaps landscape, but of time, and that's an okay place to be. If you've looked into another thing, I think it's called ecotone, and we were talking about those borderlands, that space where there is that change of ecosystems. There is an amazing biodiversity within that space. And there's so much to learn from that particular metaphor. And the other metaphor was the bison that we just saw. There's a lot of, and I've used two-eyed seeing often, but even prior to two-eyed seeing, what I wrote about was monocular vision of bison. And so, they have more depth and more perception because of where their eyes are located. And of course, the processing happens here, right? And engaging, moving, again, trying to engage higher order thinking. And so that's the metaphor that I've used, and it's one that we're going to be moving forward with as a university is monocular vision of bison, right? And it's just beautiful, right? And it's related to the prairies, so something to consider. For me, it's important for us. I was sharing that when shortly after the Prime Minister became. Shortly after Prime Minister Trudeau stepped into office, the Dene, Tsuut'ina people outside of Calgary invited him for a naming ceremony. And so I had taught students within that area, and I was sitting with the students, and they were really impressed with how well he spoke the Dene language when he came on. And, I was saying that it was elders who gifted him the name, the Tsuut'ina elders, and even though he was probably informed about the whole process, he was still caught up off guard because after they gave him the name, they pushed him forward and he stumbled. He didn't fall, but he stumbled. And so for me, that was another metaphor of how we as leaders, as teachers, I would like to push our youth forward. I love it when youth and people move past me, right? That's my responsibility to those children not yet born, 7th generation, is always thinking about succession planning. And I'm not going to hold them back, right? But I am there to push forward. And that's really what I'm here to inspire, is for each one of you through this presentation be pushed forward in one way or another. So the last image here is of a web. And within your organizations, and like the strength of the web actually is not within, all the work that the spider has put into creating this web. And that's really, really beautiful, but the strength of it actually is within the anchors. There is an anchor to this web, right? And so what are the anchors, right? If a priority is to EDI, accessibility, what are those anchors? I always say that diversity is a fact, even though we've never really acknowledged that, we've pushed diversity aside for sameness to some degree, for standardization to some degree. But diversity all around, like there's diversity all around us. Look at, in nature, there's diversity. It's a strength, it's necessary. And inclusion is a choice. And equity, and we talked about belonging. Equity is an outcome. And my idea of belonging is that belonging is a life force, right? Being connected is a life force. So that's my definition. And so, again, what are your anchors, right? And how are they, I think, what is the web that you're weaving from those anchors, right? So again, you could use this particular metaphor for your organization in amazing and beautiful ways. Gregory Kahede, he's a friend of mine. He's amazing. You can Google him. He wrote a book on Native science years and years ago. He had to self-publish it because publishers, it was Indigenous. And there was a time when this was not of interest. And so he self-published his books as a scholar. And now those books, I think, are invaluable. But Native science, look up Gregory Kahede. And like he said, we move mountains by first moving ourselves, and the way we educate makes all the difference in the world. The choice is ours. We make the difference. It is we who decide to live, not to live our visions. We are the creators of the world and the realities that we live in. We are the ones that must choose the path of our own learning, because learning is going to be transformative, and you have to be open to it, right? So, sorry for going past time, and I know we don't have time for questions, but I'll kind of hang out after the session. So thank you for listening. Getchimagwich.
That was beautiful. So I am here to close us out. Wow.
What? What? 3 days? What? No, 3 weeks, right? Like, this has been a journey. And that's what we set out to do, and we hope that was the experience that you all felt. Let's just breathe in, feel it. Wow, what an incredible week. I'm really humbled by the immense amount of respect and open-mindedness that everyone showed to our speakers, our presenters, and our colleagues. We learned a lot from each other. I'm just going to share one short learning, because I have some more remarks. That's something that I'm going to take home with me. And it goes back to day one when we were learning about controlled burns. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't really know anything about it. But I was actually surprised to learn when you do controlled burns, these vegetations that's left, the roots get deeper. And I was like, that's incredible. And when we're thinking about controlled burns structurally, what do we need to let go of to allow that depth of learning, to allow reseeding to happen? What are we willing to let go of? And so that's something I'm walking away in reflection from this conference, from all of these various sessions that we've been to. So I just want to say thanks for Mewasin and Wanaskayan for helping seed that learning in myself. Now, I have some big thank yous. And I'm really excited about this part. Of course, our first big thank you to Elder Nippy for guiding us in a pipe ceremony, which was for many of us the first time experiencing a pipe ceremony. Thank you to Elder Marjorie, who welcomed us here in Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. A big thank you to Claire, our incredible MC. I think we can all see her joy, her heart, her love for where she comes from, and I'm so grateful that she was able to incorporate that into our conference experience, so thank you. I also want to thank our speakers, our keynote speakers, our plenary speakers, all of the speakers. Who are the speakers in the room? Stand up. This conference cannot happen without the generosity of the speakers who are sharing their learning and experiences with each other. So thank you so much. Looking kind of inside CASC, I do want to thank our board of directors. They're pivotal to the organization. I especially want to thank Sandy, who you might not realize is also our board chair, not only the conference host. So thank you to the board of directors. And a special thank out there, we have actually a few retiring current board members and past board members who are retiring from their roles in their institutions. So Tracy Calageras of the Exploration Place is retiring. I don't know if Tracy's around. And then two others who aren't in the room with us today, but Julie Moskalik from Science North and Alan Nurserl, who's already retired from TELUS World of Science Edmonton. So I wanted to say a special thanks to them as well. A big thank you to our hosts, the Saskatchewan Science Centre. Our collaborators with Mewasin and Wanaskayan Heritage Park. And I wanted to say a special thanks again to Environment Climate Change Canada, who's still in the room, for being our presenting sponsor. And to all of our sponsors. So thank you. So it says lastly, but certainly not least, I want to thank the amazing CASC team. This was no small feat, pulling this off. I want to give some special thanks I want to give special thanks actually to someone you may not have seen, but Stephanie Deshane, who is my partner in crime. When we talk about the future of CASC and the future being bright, it is in collaboration between Stephanie and I that it's able to happen. So I want to say special thanks to Stephanie. And of course, an incredible special thanks to Claire Charnley, our manager for events and all of this that happened over the last 3 days. Where is Claire? I don't think we've ever seen a conference across 2 cities before, and that was incredible. So thank you. Now, naturally, when ending a conference on such a high note, we, of course, are looking forward to next year. That's right. And I'm thrilled to announce that next year's conference will take place. Yeah. That's right. St. John's, Newfoundland. That's right. I'm from Atlantic Canada, so I'm very excited about going here. June 10th to 12th. Mark your calendars now. And we're incredibly grateful for Johnson Geo Science Center of being our host next year. And we do have a short video that they've shared with us to share with all of you.
You won't believe your eyes, unable to describe what you're seeing. You've never felt so small. When you think you've seen it all, you're mistaken. There's so much to be found in the deep blue. It's amazing. Your heart is racing. Oh, it's amazing. We get high on what we don't know. We get higher the lower that we go. Just when you think you're done, there will always be another marvelous mystery beneath the sea.
Calling St. John's unique is like calling a humpback a goldfish. It's wildly different here.
I don't know if I can express how excited I am to go to St. John's, Newfoundland. It's kind of like a second home. I used to live there. I used to live in one of those colorful row houses. And fun fact, proposed to my husband on the side of Signal Hill. So we are very excited about next year's conference. Every year, we're happy to experiment and try new things with our conference. And we do that based on feedback. That's right. You're going to get a survey. And I know they're hard to fill out, but we use that information. We love to try new things, we love to improve, and we love your feedback, all of it. So please consider filling out that survey. One final reminder is that we have our AGM that's going to happen in September of this year. So it's a bit of a shift from years past. It took place in the spring, but it's going to be in September. And we hope that you'll be all able to attend. It'll be online, but that is a place where we share really fun and current updates. Final reminders, if you're sticking around this evening, flying out tomorrow, you can still use your Goose Chase app for a Rally in the Alley experience, so check that out. Please recycle your name tags on the way out. We'll use them again. We appreciate that. And just a final thank you and safe travels.